homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen. Today I am going to show you how to break down plums. Plums come in two main varieties. There's the European style plums and there's the Japanese style plums. The Japanese style plums, which tend to be larger, are my preferred eating plum. I really love them for flavor, but the seed is a cling, and so the seed is going to be really tight with that flesh, and the only way to process them is to boil them down and then put them through a food mill in order to remove the skins and the seeds. From there, you can take that pulp. You could do an Asian plum sauce out of it. There's some good canning recipes for that out there. You can turn it into fruit leather, or you can obviously turn it into all kinds of jams and jellies, but it's a process to break those down. So it's not the easiest thing to do, and you do need a couple of pieces of equipment to make it easier. And so I thought I'd show you what that looks like. These are Santa Rosa plums. This is from a weeping Santa Rosa plum tree that was here on the property when we bought it. And so it took us a couple of years to figure out what it actually was, because we bought the property in October and we had no idea what the fruit trees actually were. I knew it was some kind of a stone fruit because I could see and find a few of the seeds on the ground that were left over from these. Weeping Santa Rosa plums, they tend to be more ornamental than they are something that people grow for the fruit, although the fruit is delicious. We are in Southeast Washington, Zone 7A. And we often get ill-timed frosts in the spring. And I would say in the 11 years that we've lived here, I've probably gotten a substantial harvest off of this tree, maybe 3 times, this year being one of those 3 times. I've gotten a smattering of fruit off of it most years, but when it's only a few pieces of fruit, the starlings and the other birds tend to come in and peck at every piece of fruit that's there, and they're high up in the tree and I just can't get them. So unless the tree is really loaded where there's enough that the birds can get some and I can get some, I don't tend to get any fruit. And then we also have certain springs where we get a late frost and I just don't get any fruit at all. And so I'm really excited this year to actually have a decent harvest off of this tree. And I'm selling a lot of this fruit through local food hub that I have. But some of the fruit is actually bird pecked, or it's split for whatever reason, or it's got some scarring on it, like this one's got some scabbing on the side. And so I would say probably 1/4 to 1/3 of the fruit that I've picked off this tree is not fruit that I can actually sell because it's got some damage to it. This is a great way to use up that fruit. So not super great for eating out of hand, but super great for processing into something that you can then put on your shelf and use all year long. This year, I think I'm going to go with just a simple plum syrup and can that, and then use that in things like baked oatmeal or over waffles and pancakes and that kind of thing. I did Asian plum sauce last year and I still have quite a bit of that left, so I didn't want to do that. And I make plum jam as part of my commercial kitchen, and so I have lots and lots of plum jam. I don't really need to make that this year either. So yeah, let's get started. I'll show you what I do, and I'll show you my secret spice blend that I think makes plums just sing. Come join me.
So as always, you want to start by giving everything a good bath. These are so pretty. And then I go through them one at a time. I pick off the stem, and I'm just checking for like really rotten spots. If they're beyond salvage, I just toss them. If there's just a small spot that's bad, I cut it out. And you can almost immediately feel if something is way too soft to use. And then because we're on well water, we have filtered water. And so I'm just putting probably about 1 cup of water in the bottom of this pot just so that it doesn't burn before the plums start releasing their juices. Putting that on the stove. And then as that starts to come to a boil and the juices start getting released, I'm trying to give it a stir here. This pot is pretty full, but just trying to make sure that there isn't something in contact with the bottom that's going to burn. And you can see here, the ones that were on the very bottom are starting to fall apart. I'm going to give that about a half an hour, and then I'm going to use my potato masher to just mush it up good. And I've got this on low heat, so it's a low simmer during that time. This is my food mill. I purchased this at a hardware store in Colorado, gosh, probably 20 years ago. It is all stainless. That is the one thing I would highly recommend. It comes with 3 different screens. I'm going to use the largest one on this because I don't mind if some of the skin comes through. I'm mostly just trying to filter out the seeds. And then you're just going to fill up your food mill with our lovely plums. And you can see not a whole lot's coming through initially because the pulp is filling up the holes, but as soon as you start turning that gear, stuff's gonna start going through. And those seeds are big enough that they're just catching on some of the holes in that grate. And so you can reverse direction and it will unstick things. I'm doing that, and most of the pulp is just going through just from that. And I'm not bothering to empty this out between batches because there isn't a whole lot of stuff in there. This is the last run here. And so I haven't emptied that food mill the whole time. I've just left what was in there in there. Depending on what you're doing, sometimes you have to stop and empty it out because there's just too much pulp. I ended up with too much liquid here, and the bottom of my food mill was actually in the liquid, and so it didn't have any place it could go, and so I switched back over to the original pan once that was empty for this last little batch here. And you want to turn this until things are pretty dry, just to get the most liquid possible out of there, and stuff will stick here and there, and so you kind of have to rearrange sometimes. But just giving that a spin until everything's nice and dry, and then wipe off the bottom because there'll be a lot of pulp that's just kind of stuck to the bottom there. And I could have used a finer mesh on this and ended up with less skin, but I like that tartness that the skin brings. And then this just pops back out and rinses off really easily, and I can throw it in the dishwasher because it's stainless steel, so nothing's going to rust. And you can see how dry that little bit of pulp that's left there is. Some skins and lots of seeds. And then I'm putting everything back into my original pan. One of the biggest things I can tell people that are just starting to do food processing and canning is get some big pots and get some big bowls. I've got my heat on here, and I'm just going to simmer this down for about a half an hour. And I actually had the heat too hot, and so I ended up scorching the bottom of it a little bit. So be aware of that. Keep it on low heat. Stir it more often than I did. So our finished boiled down mixture here, I'm adding in, starting with a cup of sugar, and then my secret spice blend is cinnamon, cardamom, allspice, and black pepper. And I'm doing a teaspoon each of cinnamon and cardamom, give or take, and then a half a teaspoon of allspice and black pepper. Black pepper is surprisingly fruity, and people don't realize that. I'm giving it a taste at this point and just seeing if I think it needs more sugar, which it does. Plums are really acidic, and so I am not following a specific recipe here just because I know I could just put the plums in a jar by themselves with no sugar and they would be acidic enough to be safe. At the end there, I added a little bit of orange extract because I love the flavor of orange and plum together. And then once everything is to my liking, I'm putting these in pint jars. And I'm kind of basing the processing time. There is a recipe for plum butter, which would be much thicker than what I've got here. And so I based my processing time on that. And this is a 1/2 inch headspace, which is right to the top of that rim that you see on those jars. And I came out with almost exactly 7 pints, so not bad. And so that's 14 cups, and there's 2 cups of sugar in approximately 14 cups of plums, so not very sweet. I wanted this to have some tartness to it. I didn't want it to be like a jam. Wipe your rims, of course, and then put on our lids once we're done. And you could use this pulp as a starting point if you were making jam and the recipe called for, say, 4 cups of plums. Just have 4 cups of plum pulp and follow the recipe and you're good to go. So this is a starting point as well for lots of things if you wanted to do it that way. finger tight on these rims. That means just where you start to feel it grab, not cranking down on it. I have hot water. I have hot plum sauce in hot jars, so everything's hot going into this canner. You want to match that, so don't put cold jars in a hot water bath. Don't put hot jars in a cold water bath. And then I'm processing this. I'm going to wait for it to come back to a full boil to start my timer, and then I'm processing this for 20 minutes. And again, that's probably overkill, but it's not going to hurt it to cook longer. And since I didn't have a specific recipe for plum sauce that didn't have other things in it, I just went with that. And out of the canner they come. You want to let them sit until they're completely cool before you move them around a lot. And that's all there is to it. The little bit of plums that I had left and that didn't fit in a jar, I added about the equal parts of vodka, and we used it in cocktails. So give this a try. It's a great way to start your plum recipes with lots of different options for making things as you go. And that's all there is to it, tribe. It's absolutely delicious and a nice way to preserve the summer harvest. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.